This is Build Without Chaos. I'm Colleen Goepfert. One clear idea every episode for operators, founders, and marketers who build with intent. Welcome back to Build Without Chaos. Today I'm joined by Emily Jordan. Emily stepped into Midi at a moment when the women's health market was loud, emotionally charged, and moving fast. The environment demanded growth, but it also required care. Culture, science, and lived experience were all in play at the same time. What stood out to me about Emily's work was not what Midi amplified, but what it deliberately chose to hold steady. Rather than defaulting to louder messaging or familiar playbooks, she made decisions around pace, restraint, and credibility that shaped how the company grew. This conversation is about what it takes to build in categories where trust is central, where momentum has to be earned, and where restraint is not hesitation but strategy. Emily, I'm glad you're here today. How are
I'm
you?
good, Colleen. Thanks again. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, it'll be a good discussion. So, I wanted to start at the beginning before we dive into strategy, messaging. What initially drew you to the role at Midi?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a little bit of my origin story. I'm from a small part of Indiana where women's health is certainly not prioritized. And so most of my career has been working on behalf of women, whether that was women's sports or women's health. I had previously worked in postnatal care and then menopause care. I personally was coming into menopause and I saw just the incredible opportunity. And it felt like the last beachhead within women's health that really was underserved. And so I was really passionate about it. And then you meet Joanna, who's the founder and CEO, and some of the other founders, and you see how personal this mission really is. And so it felt like the perfect intersection of kind of my passion and then working for a really passionate leader.
Yeah. So, you started the role at Midi and you stepped into it. What did the environment actually feel like day to day beyond the role description?
Yeah, I mean, when I came in, I think we were about 30 people working out of Joanna's house. So,
Wow.
um, one thing I observed was just the inside of the company did not match the outside brand that Midi was portraying. The really special sauce that I've known since the beginning of Midi is the people on the inside of Midi are so passionate, so mission driven, so leading edge, and so innovative about women's healthcare. But the outside version of Midi was really rooted in healthcare, which is so important, but wasn't necessarily loud and proud about what they were delivering and what they believed in. And I just really saw an opportunity to show what was happening on the inside to the outside.
Yeah. So, I think, we all enter in roles where we have in our minds what we could do, what we want to do based on our experiences that we bring to the table, right? What did you realize pretty quickly that you couldn't approach the usual way that you typically do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I knew I saw a huge business opportunity. A lot of the metrics that I'm used to looking at were really off the charts. And so I knew we were going to be able to scale. But I think where I took a lot of pause was how are we going to scale that will help be sustainable? And I remember there was this one moment where we were about to launch what I thought was a really small kind of isolated product or like offering. It was basically around menopause care for breast cancer survivors. And for those that don't know, hormone replacement therapy, the main solution for menopause care, has often been not offered to women who are breast cancer survivors. And I was like, this is breast cancer survivors is a very small audience. So, us serving 0.1% of the population is going to be a pretty small offering. But when we launched it, the conversation around it went bananas. And what that showed to me was there was a conversation, there was a movement, there was a trust that Midi had that was so different than any other mission driven company I'd even worked for at the time.
Yeah.
Because women were, even if they weren't part of that audience, even if they weren't even in menopause, even if they weren't breast cancer survivors, they had a point of view. They were champions for us because we were champions for them.
I love that. Such an underserved category. Yeah,
Really.
it's amazing that it's taken this long for just it to be noticed in the environment.
What I do remember Joanna always talking about when she was early fundraising that no venture capitalists saw menopause care as a big business opportunity, but it's a huge total addressable market. It is not all women have babies, but all women go through menopause. And so that's half the population that is going to meet this moment at some point in their lives. And so it's both a huge business opportunity and a huge mission driven opportunity as well.
Interesting that the VCs didn't see it as a business opportunity. I mean, you frame it like that, it's a no-brainer, in my opinion.
Completely. And it was completely underserved due to just how the healthcare system has operated to date.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a stigma around it, right? Like, no one really talked about it. This is right now, in this time right now, I feel like people are speaking about
Yeah.
it, and it's a thing, but even generations before us, no one really talked to each other about it. There's a little bit of a taboo issue.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, everyone was going through it, so it makes no
And I
sense.
think you just thought it was this one day that all of a sudden your period stops and that's it. But in reality, this goes on for like 5 to 10 years. And so, one of my favorite voices in this space, Dr. Marie Claire Haver, talks about when she was a clinician in practice, most of her time was spent serving pregnant women, women having babies. But again, that is only 4 million babies are born a year, but 57 million women go through menopause every year or are in
Oh,
menopause. And so it's just like when you look at the math, it doesn't quite back out. And I'm so happy that women like Joanna, like Sharon, the founders, are really making it okay to talk about this.
yeah. I wanna touch on the campaign that you brought up, because at that moment, what kind of noise were you navigating? Like, you mentioned it was a small campaign and it really blew up. So, what noise were you navigating, whether from the market, from the category, from the expectations around growth? There's a lot of through line with Midi and what you were doing at the time, and I'd love for you to expand on that.
Yeah. It's not like we were the only one in the world serving menopause at the time. There were a lot
Yeah.
of players, but they kind of operated across this spectrum. There were players that were heavily rooted in healthcare and the healthcare system and insurance backed and, really anchoring on existing approaches to menopause care. And then on the flip side, there were really like almost like pill mill type of approaches that were just like, just get HRT in the hands of as many women as possible. Whatever solution they need, we'll give it to them. Direct to consumer, cash pay. And I think MIDI has always operated somewhere in between that, where we're rooted really in healthcare. We are backed by insurance. It is about accessibility and it's about offering the solutions that women want and need. And so there is always kind of a balance and a tension between being rooted in the trusted approach that is healthcare, but also looking more future looking, advanced, emerging evidence. Because the reality is, there isn't a lot of evidence within women's health, period. And so MIDI hopes to really lead that.
Yeah. So, what would have been lost if you applied a conventional B2B or B2C playbook too aggressively here?
Oh my gosh, so many things. Like just the pure raw emotion of what's happening in this category right now. Women are
Yeah.
angry. They have been underserved. They have just been told to live with the symptoms that they've had. And if we would approach just the typical, like, let's put a Facebook ad out there and scale all these traditional channels, we would have lost this entire movement and moment that we had to maximize. What we saw in the last year or two is just this wave of word of mouth and conversation that has driven the predominance of our business.
Yeah.
And we would have lost that if we just had put like a, 4x3 Facebook ad out there and said, come get GLP-1s here, or,
Really
get
familiar.
HRT here. It's so much more than that.
Was there a moment when you realized you weren't just telling a product story anymore?
100% every single time. I mean, I think one of the first things I realized was when I started, I asked the team, like, what is really working? And the first thing they said was Joanna's LinkedIn. And I was kind of like, what? Like Facebook, Google, those aren't working? But the reality is was Joanna's LinkedIn was full of personal stories and anecdotes and what was really going on and what she really believed and what she really wanted to do with Midi. And that signaled to me that there was a really personal angle to this brand that we couldn't lose if we went, more of the cold, typical B2B or B2C brand. We tell a lot of personal stories, whether that's our founder stories or our patient stories or our clinician stories, um, our ambassador stories. Like, how did people become such big advocates of Midi? What did we do above and beyond what they typically get? Because I'm sure a lot of the women we serve already have a team of healthcare providers they work with. They just choose to go to Midi. And I think that says something about our care.
So it sounds to me like you had to hold a lot of empathy when you were trying to scale and trying to provide business results. How did you hold the empathy and the science and the operational rigor needed without letting one override the other? That sounds like it would just be a lot.
Yeah. You know, I think there were a couple things that we did that really helped balance both meeting the business results and leaning into our patient needs. The first thing is within business, if you can't measure it, it's not valuable. And so we really had to measure the impact of these, what are typically seen as unmeasurable approaches to marketing. And so we put some measurement in place, attribution, incrementality to really understand, well, if we didn't do PR, or if we didn't do influencers, or if we didn't do ambassadors, if we didn't kind of take this local community approach, what would be the impact to our business? And we saw, dramatic decreases if we didn't have just this overall foundation of trust, compounded community conversation. So that was one piece, is like we made sure that whatever we put out there, we could measure in some way to show the impact.
Right.
The second piece is everyone on my team talks to at least 5 to 10 patients every single quarter. And so we are constantly rooted in what does our patient need in that specific moment. And that really rules a lot of what we're doing to date. And we mine a lot of the voice of the customer to bring that to the surface every single day.
So you're really invested in the stories of the people who are struggling and are involved in what they need of this sort of care at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. One of my favorite patient stories is this woman who came to us after just being, she came to us for menopause care. She had seen between 7 and 10 doctors about a couple of different symptoms. She'd seen specialists for, she had frozen shoulder. So she saw an orthopedist and she saw her PCP, she saw her OB, she saw a dermatologist. And speaking to one MIDI clinician, she was able to solve most of those issues within a couple weeks just through our menopause protocol. And then we went above and beyond. Something we take a lot of care in is in partnering with the traditional healthcare system to make sure that any woman that comes to Midi is also up to date on things like pap smears, mammograms, all of your typical traditional labs. And this woman hadn't been able to get in to get a mammogram. We got her in to get a mammogram, and she ended up with stage 1 breast cancer that we were able to have a conversation with her about, get her into get her mammogram, follow up with her, and then connect her back with her OB. So we aren't just serving menopause care, we're really going above and beyond for our patients.
It sounds to me like you guys are just cutting through the chaos and simplifying everything for your patients.
100%. I mean, the first thing we're doing is one of my favorite anecdotes is, well, the first thing we're doing is really listening, finally. Like, every woman deserves to be listened to. And this process of seeing 7 to 10 doctors and being told you're just fine is the most gaslighting process ever. And one of my favorite anecdotes from the early days of Midi was our CTO, who is a male, was going through and sifting through a lot of patient feedback. And something that really rose to him that he didn't quite understand was he was like, what is this feeling seen and heard? Like, why doesn't everyone just feel seen and heard? And I don't think he truly realized that women in this specific mindset are not feeling seen and heard. And just someone asking them, what can we do for you? What are you feeling? Your feelings are valid. Your labs are valid. We treat your symptoms, not just your labs, was an incredibly validating experience that I don't think he quite understood until he had come to Midi.
I think what you're saying is like you really are just bringing back marketing to the basics. I mean, really, that's what we should be thinking is what does our target audience want and how are they being seen and heard? But I think over time, you work at different companies, you gather your own internal playbook of how you want to approach things, and maybe that gets missed a lot. So it sounds like you really had to bring it back to the basics at MIDI and really have those conversations and understand your target audience before putting together any sort of playbook.
I kind of have this tension between focus and optionality. So, our focus is our audience, and that will never change. We are for women in this particular stage, but we offer them a plethora of options. So we give them care, we give them products, we give them counseling, we give them lifestyle advice. We just give them empathy and listening. And so it's packaged up as something truly holistic as an offering rather than just being a single point solution or trying to serve everyone through a blanket opportunity.
Yeah. You touched on your team, and I wanted to expand on that. So you're leading people who are deeply mission driven alongside people who saw a market opportunity. How did you lead through that tension?
I feel like that's always the job of marketing is to take the mission-driven people and marry them with the market-driven people. Like, you kind of have to always speak math and art at the same time, and my job is to be fluent in both. Let's say the problem is CAC is increasing. Well, a mission-driven person might not necessarily understand why it's increasing, but what I can say is if we have more people talking about MIDI, coming to the conversation, driving more word of mouth, CAC's going to go down. I think the other piece I would call out is we are so rooted in trust that sometimes there's a tension between mission and market because what the market needs might not marry to the mission.
You brought up that when you first entered Mini, you saw the numbers, it looked like a great growth opportunity. Was there a moment when speed stopped feeling like the right lever and you had to kind of pull back and say, whoa, we got to get this right first?
You know, I've spent the last decade in high growth startups, and I think MIDI is the highest high growth startup I've worked at in the best kind of way. But there was a moment when we needed to ensure that clinical quality and the quality of our care was at the same level it was when we first started. And so there have been moments, very few of them, but there are still moments where we've questioned clinical quality based on the feedback we're getting from our patients. And we've intentionally slowed down growth to ensure that the clinicians that we're bringing in can really live up to the bar that we've set with the brand. And so we've changed hiring, we've slowed the pace of hiring for clinicians to ensure that everyone we bring on really meets that bar. Because the worst way to erode trust and to lower word of mouth growth is to have a bad relationship with your clinician. Like,
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't market a bad product. I have to market an amazing experience and live up to the brand that I'm communicating out.
What felt most fragile early on, credibility or clinical trust?
I think they're really intertwined. I think it wasn't necessarily an either or within credibility and clinical trust because they're both connected. I think
Yeah.
what felt really different was we're not just a healthcare company. We're actually like a consumer brand. And so, how do we maintain clinical quality and credibility while looking more like a consumer brand? And so, that was one big pivot that felt like a tough one to do. Like, how do you actually show up more like a consumer brand, but be a healthcare company at heart?
Yeah. And was there a through line that you could find there?
I think one way that Midi, we've done it really well was actually leveraging content as our core foundation. And what I mean by content is showing women, whether it's through social or newsletter or a blog, that we are the experts in the space. So, whatever the next emerging trend is, a year ago it was microdosing GLP-1s. We're going to jump on that and not necessarily to maximize the opportunity, but to actually just inform women. Here's what you should know if you're choosing to go down this path. Peptides, here's what you should know. Supplements, here's what you should know. That's new, we want to make sure that we're going out to market with some digestible content for our patients or potential patients to help them understand themselves what they need to do with the hope eventually they become a patient because we've established that trust and credibility just by how we're marketing to them.
So that's interesting. So you get in front of it, which shows me that you're having the conversations with people before they enter menopause.
100%. I mean, I think women don't realize that menopause starts actually in your late 30s, early 40s. Menopause, actually, the moment is just a day when your period officially stops after 12 months, but you're having 10 years of symptoms. So, yes, we are trying to get ahead of it. We're trying to get ahead of trends and inform women based off of our credibility and clinical philosophy what they should know, whether they choose to come to Midi or not. I think that's the biggest trust opportunity is we want to make sure you're informed whether you come to Midi or not.
That's the best type of marketing,
Exactly.
really. You're just establishing trust before the quote unquote issue
Yeah.
arises.
And I think that does
Yeah,
more for us as a long-term sustainable brand than any short-term opportunity.
right. So you mentioned Midi is one of the highest growth companies you've been at. You mentioned that you had to really balance credibility, clinical trust. You had a team that was mission driven and also data driven. As that became clearer throughout your role, what shifted in how you led day to day that you didn't really do at previous companies?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think there's a couple things. There's always motivation and helping a team that is going through this breakneck pace stay motivated. The numbers are obviously motivated, but not everyone's motivated by that. And so there's a lot of conversations about how we're helping women, telling patient stories, looking at the numbers to see the results that we've delivered, showcasing and highlighting really great wins and successes from the team. So that's one. The second one is, I would say, prioritization. I mean, that's a little bit typical at all high growth startups, but when you have this large of a total addressable market, it is like prioritization on steroids because there are so many different paths that you can go. And you really have to help the team understand what is the number one priority for this week, even. And so, while the fundamentals are pretty much the same, like motivation and prioritization, I just think the level of detail you have to get to when you're at a company of this size. I mean, we're 6 months ago, we were a totally different company than we are now. And so, I break down priorities basically by week to help people understand, like, what's the one thing you have to achieve this week to really make sure that they're focused.
Yeah, it keeps people's roles clear, objectives clear, and I'm sure that translates into the execution of the different campaigns you're running.
100%. And then I think on the motivation side, something we've talked about is we're not just delivering campaigns, we're delivering a movement.
Right.
And that is the ultimate motivating factor. And so if people feel like they're part of this bigger opportunity and bigger movement and leading the movement, like we are the category captain that's leading this movement, that is incredibly motivating for the team. And it gives them
Yeah.
a level of intrinsic value that I don't think any, Google or Facebook or large tech company can deliver to them.
Yeah. I mean, I'm feeling motivated and I don't even work at Midi. So you're doing this conversation is motivating me right
I
now.
remember reading a few articles and listening to a few podcasts before I met Joanna. And I was just like, I am so angry. Like, let me at this problem. Like, let me hit it up
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
crazy. And that's the exact fire you want when you come into a job like Midi.
Well, and I would assume you feel like you're helping people, which is always the ultimate,
Yeah.
right? Like that's really what we all want to be doing
Yeah.
is how can we contribute and help?
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
there are some companies that like say they're helping people by like, here's another SaaS platform that's going to help you
Yeah.
make your day better
Yeah.
organized. But like, oftentimes to me, in previous jobs, I've said like, we're not saving lives. We
Right.
are actually kind of
But you are. But you actually are here.
we actually are saving lives here, so it just
Yeah.
brings a level of, like, importance to the work that we have.
That's really funny. I used to say the same thing at previous roles. We're not curing cancer, we're just doing XYZ. But actually that doesn't really
Doesn't
apply
apply.
to
We
MIDI.
are actually saving as I mentioned, the patient who we did help, identify her early cancer symptoms, we did save her life, and it's kinda wild.
Yeah. Is there anything that you start doing differently at MIDI or something that you stopped doing altogether once you recognize the demands of this role and how intricate the through line was?
Yeah. I have this Post-it up here that says, "Messy isn't always bad." So I really had to drop, like, all perfectionism and, like, order.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we do on the inside is very messy, and I think that's why we've been successful is we're like, "Let's try X, Y, and Z and see what happens and see how people react and respond." Um, so I've really let go of a lot of perfectionism, and then I think something I'm learning now is we're in this next phase of growth where we're not just product, 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 category, 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 or we're getting large enough that we really have to think about systems, portfolios, interconnectedness. That is just a whole new mind space. Um, because, you know, up until now, we've been predominantly a care company. So we really are, I think we're moving into this really integrated approach, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you've simplified the process,
Hopefully.
which has needed yeah, which has been needed across the board. I mean, I know we're specifically talking about menopause here, but like, I think this is a process that needs to be simplified, and hopefully you guys are the trailblazers with that in general, with healthcare.
Well, and I don't think it's just simplification, it's also like a relationship that we're building. So if we think about it,
Yeah.
one thing I also learned as I was coming into Midi was a lot of women in this stage of life leave the healthcare system. They're done having kids, but they have this gap before they start to, hit osteoporosis or any cancer diagnosis or hypertension, diabetes. So there's about a 10 to 20-year span where they're just doing the basics. Their lives are focused on career, kids, they're likely have aging parents. And so what MIDI is trying to do is make it easy for them to still take care of themselves. And so
Yeah.
I think that's the part that I'm most proud of is that a lot of women say that MIDI is their only healthcare provider.
Wow.
So I'll
I mean,
take them having MIDI over nothing any day of the week.
how has this chapter informed how you think about building today?
Yeah, great question. I think I think one thing is like really testing and learning and trying things. I've been really amazed by how fast we've been able to test and learn really big initiatives, like launching a supplement line or creating a longevity care offering. Like these are really big initiatives that other companies would have taken years to do. And we did them in a matter of months, of course, with a lot of rigor, but not as much as I think you might think. So that's one, like test and learn in big ways. I love I love the culture and values that have been really rooted in this company. There's a level of ambition and tenacity that I will forever look for. Ambition, tenacity, and empathy, like that is a very uncommon combination. And it's very unique at Midi that I will never, I will have to have that forever. And maybe last, like my role actually recently changed. And at first, I was not super happy about that role changing. But I'm 6 months from that change, and it's been the best thing for me. I've never learned more. I've never gotten enough space. And so I've space to think and think bigger and think differently. I'm sure I'll find myself in a situation like that again where your role changes and everyone talks about giving away your Legos. Everyone has to give away their Legos. I have this experience to show um, how great that can be on the other side of it.
So, adding on to that, what feels creative or professionally interesting to you now, having lived through that career movement you just mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, I think what really I'm excited about now is going from like a care-driven business, kind of a single offering, to just this integrated approach and systems thinking. That really breaks your brain because there's a lot of ways that you could show up. And so I'm really excited to think about that. That is like a big strategic thinking that oftentimes when you're at a Series B startup, you don't get the opportunity to do because you're working so fast.
Yeah,
So I'm like getting out of execution and operating mode and thinking about more like strategic and vision approach.
longer term vision.
Yeah. Like we can be more
Seem
successful when we're integrated and than we can if we're just thinking singularly.
that makes sense. Well, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah.
I've really I feel like I've learned a ton just speaking with you through this movement you guys have made and continue to make at MIDI. Thanks so much for joining me today. Is there anything that you want to kinda add on?
I don't think so. I think this has been really fun. I just feel like this is an area that, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about, and there's so much to learn out there. So I guess the one thing I would say to your audience is go learn about this, get ahead of it if anyone's in this near the stage. And if you have questions, come to MIDI.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for joining.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Colleen. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Build Without Chaos. If today's episode resonated, subscribe and share it with someone else who's building without chaos.